Episode 1. The episode begins with a teacher writing shakily on the board. He then turns around and inquires which of his students are trembling with fear like him. All except one raise their hands. The exceptional case, called Baki Hanma, is dozing off like he has no worries about the world, except his face is covered with hideous wounds. Later he faces some school bullies who are ready to pounce on him but are halted by that abominable glare that gives vibes of a ferocious animal inside Baki. Soon Baki is called to the principal's office where Mitsunari, the manager of the infamous underworld fight arena, is waiting for him. Later Mitsunaro tells Baki about 5 various prisoners who have broken loose just to reach Tokyo. One of them is Dorian from America, Doyle from Scotland, Sikorsky from Russia, Speck who was imprisoned 200 meters in the deep waters in the United States, and finally Ryuku Yanagi, who is already from Tokyo. Episode 2. Mitsunaro warns Baki that those 5 mighty carnivores are heading towards Tokyo to fight the king of all martial arts, and that is of course our hero Baki. Not only that, Tokyo is world famous for having a dark side. That is the underground fight arena where world famous martial artists go through life-threatening experiences. The scene shifts to a park where an expert kickboxer Robinson is brutally murdered by one of the prisoners at large, Doyle. Later the school bullies gather some fighter goons, having expertise in daggers and chain swinging, in order to get back to Baki. Suddenly Baki is startled to see a black shadow emerging from behind one of the bullies. Later the Metropolitan Police are having a meeting in which the same topic about 5 estranged prisoners is under discussion when someone comes and informs him that a witness has seen Speck creating a ruckus around the town. Back at the fight zone, Speck takes the gun from the bully and tries to shoot himself multiple times. But nothing happens. The bully is so terrified that he literally loses his control of his pants. Soon Speck tussles with Baki as well, warning him that they will meet soon. Elsewhere Yujiro Hanma, who seems to be all muscles and no brains, is the strongest man on earth, and the father of Baki Hanma is watching the news about the 5 prisoners and thinks that the FBI is useless against them. Speck is resting in the jail which he considers as a motel. Episode 3. At Shindaju, Dorian arrives and when Katsumi asks him to take off his shoes, he obediently follows his instructions only to throw them on Katsumi, catching him completely off guard. Later Doppo also confronts him but Dorian burns him off by sipping alcohol first, and then throwing fire at him like a fire eater. At a circus, a fitness test is taking place at the school, and although Baki's strength is unmatchable, it's far beyond the standard of softball, 15-meter race, and long jump. The next day Mitsunari is having a chat with one of 2 prime fighters, Kanjijiri the wrestler and Takayuki, the judo expert. However, one of the wanted prisoners, Sikorsky, arrives suddenly and has an ugly spat with Takayuki, and then Kanjijiri, sending them both to the hospital. Later he turns to Mitsunari and orders him menacingly that they have to talk. Meanwhile, at the prison, Speck has again fled the prison, leaving a sign "I'll be back soon." Sikorsky leads Mitsunari to the underground arena where Doyle, Dorian, Speck, and Yanagi have also arrived. They all have one goal, and that is to taste their own defeat. Soon Baki along with Doppo Urachi and others also arrive at the arena. Episode 4. All the top fighters have been gathered in the ring. Doppo Urachi is the ferocious owner of Shindaju and is also known as the God of War. Kaoru Hanoyama is another contender, who is the boss of the Hanoyama gang, and is an expert in street fights. The most remarkable thing about him is that he always has a bottle of booze glued to his mouth. Mitsunari narrates that previously there was a tournament of 38 fighters and out of them 17-year-old Baki was declared the winner. When Mitsunari is about to recite the rules for the battle, Shibukawa cuts him short that those are not needed. The members disperse although the fight has officially commenced. Anyone can attack anybody at any time. Dorian has a face-off with Doppo and Ritsu, in which through an invisible wire Dorian manages to chop off Doppo's fingers. However, Doppo is elated because in this way he can punch more effectively. Meanwhile, Sikorsky finishes off a revengeful Kanjigari in the latter's dojo. Episode 5. Speck is observing a steaming romance between Baki and Kazu, and is about to pounce on them like a hungry wolf when he suddenly freezes at Baki's sharp, monstrous glare. He musters up all the courage and manages to free himself from the clutches of that deadly stare, when suddenly Kaoru Hanoyama appears and attacks Speck. But before that, he doesn't forget to strip himself in order to show off the life-size tattoo engraved painfully on his back along with other wounds that he proudly received while being in multiple fights. Soon both the lions of the jungle get into a brutal fight with Speck punching non-stop on Kaoru. Meanwhile, the Metropolitan Police are really fed up with Speck's habit of breaking out of the jail, and then breaking in at any time he wants. Back to the fight. Karu fights back, forcing Spec to give up. However, Spec gives a neat ending by placing some bullets between Karu's teeth and gritting them to cause a mighty explosion. Episode 6. Everyone might have felt that the fight is over, however, it has just caught fire when Karu fights back and punches Spec so hard. Later, the Metropolitan Police witness Karu dragging a distraught Spec towards them, and the police look at him with a new kind of respect. Soon a policeman begins to narrate how, however, Spec fights back and begins to hit Karu repeatedly. Later, he takes out a gun and begins to shoot at both of Karu's legs. When Spec is about to shoot the gun inside Karu's mouth, the latter dodges artfully, allowing the bullet to pass through his torn cheek. Karu begins to batter Spec when the latter tries to create a distraction through blinding flash lightning that not only blinds the opponent but deafens him as well for some time. Spec grabs the opportunity and pounces on Karu from behind, but Karu uses his hand pressure to dislocate Spec's arm from its original socket. After much toil, Karu is victorious. Strangely, doctors observe that Spec's body has shrunken from its usual size, and it seems that he is much older than he is speculated to be. The doctors conclude that since Spec's goal of being defeated has been fulfilled, that's why he has finally reached his end. Meanwhile, Baki is being lectured by his teacher about why brains are better than muscles when Doyle breaks in by smashing a glass window, and soon the fight begins. Episode 7. Baki tries his best. The ruckus is not created inside the class because his class fellows are still unaware that he is an underground fighter. Soon both Baki and Doyle jump out of the window. Doyle gets hurt in the face but is thoroughly impressed by Baki's moves. Doyle vanishes, and the three bullies comically bow in respect as soon as they spot Baki. Yanagi, disguised as a gardener, attacks him with his nunchucks. Baki is not prepared for this sudden attack but manages to dodge. Shibukawa appears from behind and threatens Yanagi with a kettle containing normal water. Yanagi begins to scream because he thinks the kettle is hot, but he manages to break Shibukawa's glasses and pins him down with his tiger claws. Next, he attacks Baki by using his way of void martial art technique and asks him mysteriously about the most poisonous gas in the world. Baki seems mesmerized and is unable to move. Soon Yanagi, the poison, places his palm on Baki's face, which kind of creates a void, meaning he actually blocks his oxygen supply, thus knocking him down to the ground. Yanagi escapes on the advent of police cars, but before that, he doesn't forget to mention that the most poisonous gas is oxygen. Episode 8. Mitsunari condemns both Baki and Shibukawa for miserably losing against Yanagi and taunts them for not behaving like professional fighters. However, a fully mummified Koru tries to pacify him by holding him by his collar and giving him a good deal of shaking. Baki has a fierce encounter with Dorian, who enters carrying a bucket of gasoline. He splashes the gasoline all over Mitsunari's place when suddenly Katsumi appears and artfully lights the lighter and completely burns off Dorian. Katsumi's father Doppo lauds his efforts but says a true martial artist never uses a weapon, not even a pencil. Next, a martial artist named Kusumi is about to have a face-off with Dorian. Hugh cuts off Dorian's ear with the help of a small fishing wire camouflage within his fist. However, Doppo disapproves and says that rigorous martial arts training transforms one's hands and feet into weapons. While Doppo's lecturing is going on, Dorian uses his invisible wire to lasso around Katsumi and Q, but Doppo chalks it off from the middle. Dorian vanishes. Later, Dorian is found in an underground sewer where he has made his temporary abode, only to be encountered again by Q. Episode 9. The fight begins with Dorian successfully counterattacking Q's moves. Q then splashes his blood into Dorian's eyes, but the latter flings a shard of glass toward his eyes and then throws a massive blow on Q's face. However, Q is feeling elated for some reason, and Dorian comments that this is the sign of a true warrior. Q doesn't stop and attacks again, but every time Dorian overpowers him, singing his own disrupted tune. Soon Q gets hold of Dorian's empty glass bottles and begins to attack fiercely, giving serious wounds to Dorian. Dorian begins to weep, or pretends to weep, and begs Q to leave him alone. However, Q brutally plucks out Dorian's eyeballs. Q is on cloud 9 when Dorian claps and snaps him out. To Q's horror, Dorian is perfectly okay and his eyes are also at their place. Dorian clarifies that Q was under his infamous hypnotic effect where he falsely believed he was winning against Dorian. Later, Ritsu, while punching a bag, senses something inside. Soon he finds a battered body of Q tied up inside that punching bag. Q had received fatal injuries and was rushed to the hospital. Later, members of Shin Daju surround a disguised Dorian and lead him towards a deserted amusement park. Episode 10. Dorian lightens up the amusement park and rides a merry-go-round happily, proving that there is a child in the heart of every man. At the amusement park, Dorian has a face-off with a third-degree black belt holder named Sudo. Sudo is miserably beaten by Dorian at the roller coaster ride when Dorian attacks him with his infamous fish wire. Later, when Katsumi threatens Dorian that he is not destined to live for long, Dorian reminds Ritsu of the time when he was training as a monk. Ritsu was constantly denied a higher title by his master, and the reason was that there was another stranger contender who managed to dig a deep tunnel just in a day by using his hands and feet only, an ancient Chinese method. His master mentioned that the stronger contender was a foreigner, and Raizu vows to meet that contender even if he has to kill him. At present, Ritsu immediately recognizes Dorian as that strange foreign contender and pays Dorian his utmost respects. Episode 11. Dorian comments that it has been more than 40 years since he left that monk's temple, and according to the rules of the monk temple, a monk cannot attack his fellow monk, even if he has committed greater sins. Ritsu refuses to fight with Dorian. Katsumi jumps in as always does, but Papa Doppo stops him in the middle and wants to tackle Dorian all alone. But before that, he doesn't forget to strip himself completely and brags about the 8-foot tiger he once slayed, and that's why he is also known as the Tiger Slayer. The fight begins and Doppo gives a mighty punch to Dorian, making the latter ooze out the bottle of acid that he had hidden inside his mouth for an attack. Dorian tries to escape, but Doppo is far more skilled. Dorian then uses his famous hypnosis attack, but Doppo's fighting spirit is so amazing that he overcomes that hypnosis and manages to knock Dorian down. Amidst the ferocious fight, both realize that both are suitable to give each other the taste of defeat. Meanwhile, Baki is caught kissing Kazu by a wrathful Yujiro Hanma. Episode 12. A distraught Dorian is completely overpowered by Doppo, who yet again brags that he is winning because he has devoted his life to martial arts. Later, a fully bandaged Kyo arrives in a wheelchair, to everyone's surprise, to give a finishing blow to Dorian and remind everyone about the mummy returns. A furious Dorian attacks Doppo's place, and when Doppo reaches home, he is not prepared for Dorian's explosive attacks. However, Doppo manages to injure Dorian. Later, Dorian is completely nailed by Ritsu and loses his mental balance. Meanwhile, Baki and Kazu decide to take their relationship to the next level. At night, Kazu is ambushed by a prying Sikorsky in the safe vicinity of her own house. Episode 13. Sikorsky is harassing Kazu when she calls Baki on the top of her lungs. Baki manages to batter Sikorsky, who jumps out of the window. When Baki goes after him, he is disappointed to find that Sikorsky has escaped, leaving his coat. A forever sluggish Baki is examining the coat and doesn't realize that Sikorsky has actually created a diversion to abduct Kazu. Meanwhile, the members of Interpol are having a meeting about recapturing the remaining 3 prisoners at large when an officer from the US offers the Japanese higher officer to visit the most treacherous assassin working for the US government and a specialized jailer in the Arizona State Prison, Oliva. The Japanese officer watches in great awe when Oliva takes down a former corrupt police officer with the help of his iron body and icy cold demeanor.